Brother Joseph, your energy is amazing. But the men would like to know when our next stop will be.
What do I have? Men or heifers?
Well, certainly some of the men are the size of heifers, hence the sweating and the panting.
The work of the Lord must go forth, Brother Kimball.
Yes, I agree, and I'm sure the Lord would want workers who have 2 legs and 2 arms and moving parts to spread his word, rather than just bones laying on the ground.
No bones, Heber. I'm just checking your spirit. That's the most important part of the body. Let's stop here.
Bless you. All right, men. Let's stop for a moment. Joseph. Oh my.
Brother Kimball, fetch me some men and shovels.
Certainly.
When you peel back the pre-Columbian history of the United States, you might just find the Book of Mormon. Hidden in the Heartland. Millions of people worldwide believe in the Book of Mormon. Published in 1830 by religious leader Joseph Smith, this book of scripture tells an historical account of a group of ancient American inhabitants who was visited by the resurrected Christ. But did these events actually take place? And if they did, where? In 2003, a video was released based on a recent DNA study. The film, titled DNA versus the Book of Mormon, argues that because the DNA of native South Americans does not match with those from the Middle East, the Book of Mormon must be false. Amid the questions and doubts, a new movement among some modern church members started, one dedicated to the belief that tangible evidence of the Book of Mormon was to be found in the heartland of America.
I have been involved with some of the most exciting research involving the Book of Mormon. I've been a lifelong member of the church. I'm a 5th generation member of the church, and I have had an opportunity, based on doing scientific research, to be able to become excited about some specific aspects of the Book of Mormon that have been problematic in the past.
Rod Meldrum is founder of an organization called the Firm Foundation.
Well, this actually all started in 2003 when my family and I went to the April General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Salt Lake City. It was right after the Winter Olympics, and so they had all these new security protocols that they were doing. And so we were all standing outside in the plaza area, and there was this big, huge sign, and it said, "DNA proves the Book of Mormon is false." As I was there looking at this big banner, I thought, there's going to be an answer for this.
There has been many questions raised about the DNA connection. As you go to the conference center at a general conference time, they will march around with a big sign saying that DNA evidence shows that the Book of Mormon is not true. Where actually it depends on where the setting is.
The whole DNA thing became this great big issue because there was a complete lack of it in the native populations in all of the Americas for a long time. It wasn't until later, as more and more DNA was being sequenced, that there was actually a DNA type that was found in Native Americans in North America around the Great Lakes area.
Rod is author of the book Exploring the Book of Mormon in America's Heartland.
I know that the Book of Mormon is true from a spiritual standpoint, but because I know it's true from a spiritual standpoint, I know that there's got to be physical evidence, especially when the Book of Mormon itself prophesies that there would be.
Much of the book is a visual introduction into the possibility that the Book of Mormon events could have taken place in America's heartland.
Where were these cities? If they built cities, where are they? That's actually one of the big arguments against the Book of Mormon and the church. People who are Christian say the Bible says over in Israel, they talk about Jerusalem, and you go there and Jerusalem is there. You know, the Sea of Galilee is a real place. It talks about the house of Caiaphas. Well, the house is still there. Now, they can argue as much as they want to about the doctrines included in the Bible, but the archaeology is pretty much irrefutable. People then point to the Book of Mormon and say, where is the evidence?
Well, the Book of Mormon is very understandable. It's just that a lot of people have a hard time making a real connection with where it took place, the people, and their history, and to make that all tie together.
People want to know, what kind of evidence is there really for the Book of Mormon?
The people that I discuss this with, who are non-LDS, academics, historians, researchers like myself, they simply tell me they can't buy the God showing up in the angel thing. But they do recognize the book is real.
Wayne May is the editor-in-chief of Ancient American magazine. Wayne provides much of the information for Rod Meldrum and the Firm Foundation.
From Ancient American that I've been publishing, my regular magazine, which is my business, I glean from that things that I find that are supportive for the Book of Mormon. I call them parallels.
There's been findings. Wayne has actually found Hopewell-style cities using the directions from that book. Now, that isn't possible if it's a fictitious book. So the book apparently is the history of a Hebrew tribe that came here, 600 BC, somewhere in that area. And it seems the evidence is there that the book is real.
Somebody wrote that book. So there's no question the book isn't real. The big question is, how did an uneducated fellow write this book when he did? And then, of course, now they realize that the Book of Mormon really does line up with the Hopewell culture.
One of the main studies coming from ancient American researchers is the fascination of the Hopewell civilization. Hopewell comes from the name of the owner of the land, Mordecai Hopewell, where the first remnants of this lost civilization were discovered. The Hopewell civilization was first uncovered in the late 1840s through the excavation headed up by Ephraim Squire and Edwin Davis.
You have E.G. Squires, who was out there surveying about 800 of these mounds and earthwork structures. And he had collected well over 6,000 artifacts. There are literally tens of thousands of mounds, earthwork structures, and fortifications that once existed.
The Hopewell culture is dated to have existed between 200 BC and 500 AD. No known Hopewell natives are currently alive today, and the connection between the Hopewell and the Native American is long since lost. Their remains are found in the surrounding Great Lakes area, with a bulk of the artifacts coming from the Ohio River Valley, and includes such states as Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, Michigan, Ohio, Tennessee, and New York.
A lot of people are completely unaware of this civilization and how it kind of progressed. What happened was that they began to show up in the archaeological record down around the panhandle of Florida. Then this ancient civilization, they began to move up into eastern Tennessee, the southern Appalachian Mountains, where they were there for quite a long time. And then they moved over into the Mississippi River Valley and then up into the Ohio River Valley. And this civilization crescendoed into a massive civilization. They had over 200,000 cities, fortifications, embankments, ceremonial centers, temple sites, and so forth that they built out of earth. They don't know exactly what happened, but right around 400 years after Christ, all the road building, the ceremonial center building, the temple building, the city building, just abruptly ended.
One of the clear indications of the Hopewell remains are the burial mounds that exist today. These mounds are no accident of nature, but are man-made structures that can be seen across America's heartland. Mounds of specific shapes and sizes, perfect circles, perfect squares, perfect octagons, and others. Some of these mounds are buried with mass graves. Many are buried with the pieces that make up the Hopewell culture. Effigy pipes in the shapes of many different animals, curious artwork, hieroglyphics, metallurgy, including copper and iron, and signs of a religious culture that includes a knowledge of the Bible and the Hebrew language. One example of the preservation of the Hopewell civilization is Dickson Mounds. Located in Lewiston, Illinois, Dickson Mounds is part of the Illinois State Museum.
Dickson Mounds was the birth of an idea by a chiropractor, Dr. Don Forrest Dickson. And he did his original excavation hoping to find a large number of people in a single spot that had been buried together. And he thought if he could find that, he might determine what type of disease was instrumental in taking the lives of those people. But he, in fact, found that very early on, but then began to expand his excavation and, in fact, very quickly gave up his practice and spent the rest of his life here devoted to the excavation and then the preservation of Dickson Mounds. We're fortunate that he wasn't a professional archaeologist, and I say that because at the time he was doing his preservation work in the 1920s, the primary focus of many institutions and museums was on the acquisition of large numbers of objects, and they often paid very little attention to the information that those objects might have contained about the cultures that they represented. So Dr. Dickson's work here was a radical departure from the past. Havana Hopewell is all over Illinois, and it was certainly a cultural phenomena that arrived overnight for a period starting maybe by 50 or so AD up to maybe 200 AD. The whole mid-continent was cast in that spell at that time and then began to drop away. We don't know why. We don't know if the religion began to fall apart, if the important people who held it together died away, or if there was simply an upheaval and people rebelled against the culture. We don't know. But each of these cultures in Illinois starts out, reaches its climax, a wonderful peak, and then it drops away in time, and then it's replaced by something else that begins to build up. This is a map of Illinois created by the Illinois Archaeological Survey. I think there are somewhere just under 170,000 archaeological sites recorded. I would doubt that 10% of the archaeological sites that exist in Illinois have actually been found. In fact, in Illinois, it's probably easier to find where an archaeological site is on the landscape than where one isn't. As we have dealt into and excavated these sites, we found that these ancient people are far more complex than we had ever imagined, and the advanced civilization that they had here rivaled many of the great civilizations that you would see in Mexico or South America. We have so many surprises in American archaeology. In fact, anything you write, you'd better be prepared for in a year or two or three to have a surprise cast upon you that's going to change the image of what you've already said. And one of those great surprises was the finding of the bison kill site below Peoria. Until we found that, bison weren't supposed to have been in Illinois until about 1500 to 1550 AD. We found a nearly complete bison skeleton, but when we were digging it, embedded in the 10th right rib was a chipstone spear point. And when I looked at it, it was like stepping in a bucket of ice water. So we got two radiocarbon dates for it, one 398 the other 413 BC. We set bison hunting back in Illinois about 2,000 years. So just that one find has magnified into this incredible new understanding of not only bison in Illinois, but man's hunting of bison and butchering techniques now.
Ann Schaefer lives along the Illinois River, right outside of Griggsville, Illinois. Her late husband used to collect the many artifacts that make up the Hopewell civilization right outside of their home.
Most of this stuff was all dug. We just dug it with a screwdriver, a little bit of dirt at a time.
Coincidentally, she lives right across the street from a significant but forgotten moment in LDS church history known as the account of Zelph's Mound. Zelph's Mound is one clue in the search for connections between the Hopewell culture and the Nephites spoken of in the Book of Mormon. In 1834, Joseph Smith traveled with a group of saints on a tour known as Zion's Camp. This camp marched from Kirtland, Ohio to western Missouri. In one stop along the banks of the Illinois River, Joseph recounted in a letter to his wife Emma the experience he had on top of this particular mound.
The whole of our journey, in the midst of so large a company of social, honest, and sincere men, wandering over the plains of the Nephites, recounting occasionally the history of the Book of Mormon, roving over the mounds of that once beloved people of the Lord, picking up their skulls and their bones as a proof of its divine authenticity, and gazing upon a country, the fertility, the splendor, and the goodness so indescribable, all serves to pass away time unnoticed.
Joseph and the brethren, during the Zion's Camp March, they left Kirtland, walked across Ohio, all of Indiana, and about 2/3 of Illinois, hit the banks of the Illinois River, and they stayed there for maybe 2 days, maybe 3, we're not sure. Well, while they were there, somebody found the large mound that we call Zelph's Mound, that Joseph identified. And what was really unusual is that on top of that mound, this ancient order of altar stones, it was still erect, still standing after all this time.
On the top of this mound, there was the appearance of 3 altars, which had been built of stone, one above another, according to the ancient order, and the ground was strewn over with human bones.
They saw some things that caused them to want to dig, which they did. They found a skeleton of a man, pretty much entire. And while they were standing there, Joseph, he says, by the Spirit of the Almighty, and then he begins to tell who this person is.
They found Zelph, as the prophet was told his name was, with an arrowhead lodged in his bones. And the prophet could tell us exactly who he was, where he was from, what he did in his life, and where he had been.
Joseph said, by the Spirit of the Almighty, he identifies this man as Zelph, that he was a servant under the prophet Ondagas, who ruled from the hill Cumorah, or Eastern Sea, all the way to the Rocky Mountains. What is nice about the Illinois archaeologists, they come along in the 1970s and the 80s. They cut a trench through the mound. They date this thing originally about 250 plus or minus 100 years. And then a second group comes in from Dickson Mounds, the archaeologists, and they date it at 380 AD. And Joseph's Zelph Mound says this is during one of the last great struggles of the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is over at 385. And our non-LDS academics have dated it now at 380 AD. How did Joseph know this was a Hopewell Mound? How could he put it in the time frame of the Book of Mormon? Because he was inspired. And sad to say, but the church in general doesn't even know this story. I think by the time Nauvoo was over, the saints were so battered, so hurt, so beat, and we know this. When they got to Salt Lake, they just wanted a really fresh start. And I don't think it was a direct intention, but I really think Joseph was put in a box and they just put him up on a shelf for safekeeping. And then the church kind of starts from there and goes on. That's how I look at it.
The church has never come out with an official statement of where the events of the Book of Mormon took place.
And the reason I have a problem with the Central American thing is there's no evidence of the Book of Mormon there.
When the book came out about their travels in the Yucatan, a copy was given to Joseph Smith. He made comments that this was evidence of the Book of Mormon.
Hidden in the Heartland.